Terrific, thanks. All right, hi folks, thanks for being here. Let me get set up just a second here. I'm going to share some slides with you. Um, so yeah, the right business structure for reducing legal risk and leveraging opportunity. I'm Rachel Armstrong. So I'm joining you from northern Minnesota. Uh, I grew up on an old farm just outside of town. Those are my actual ancestors on land that we actually farmed. Before us, it was the Fond du Lac tribe of Ojibwe who stewarded this land. I really planted a seed in me. Food and farming is what I have always loved, and I've worked in many sectors of it. I ran a farm to restaurant program. I worked on multiple fruit and vegetable operations. I worked for a coalition of CSA providers, worked for restaurants that bought local food. Throughout all of those experiences, one of the common threads that I experienced is that we had legal questions and we did not have a good option to get answers for those things. So, looking at my career and thinking, gosh, I this is where I want to work. This is who I want to work with and for. How do I provide value? I started to think, gosh, maybe I should address that problem. Maybe I should go to law school and figure out how we can provide quality legal education to hardworking farmers and ranchers. So fortunately, it actually worked out that way. Went to law school, spent those 3 years figuring out how I was going to structure and fund this organization to provide exactly that. So that was 2012. I'm the executive director today. Have a terrific staff of 5 folks nationwide. We've always operated remotely and always served a nationwide farm audience. Our roots are in the Midwest. And of course, that's where I live again today. I went to law school in Denver, and that was a powerful opportunity to discover more of the Western experience with agriculture, more of a ranching style environment. It was really valuable to my education and growth. So here I am back in Minnesota. I have 4-year-old twins and a 5-year-old. They really like hockey because it's usually cold around here. You usually find me wearing a down vest in whatever program I'm delivering in the winter, because northern Minnesota. So it's a good time, but I want to know more about you. I would love if you could introduce yourself in the chat box. Name and affiliation are great, but what I really want to know is, what are you an expert in? Everybody's an expert in something, so don't say no, not me. I'm just a generalist. Yeah, you're an expert in something. For myself, exactly, I would say I'm an expert in canning large volumes of applesauce each year, spending as little time as possible doing that because of aforementioned 4-year-old twins and a 5-year-old. So I have a bunch of tricks up my sleeve so how I can produce that much applesauce, because my children consume large quantities of it. So that's what I'm an expert in, but I want to hear from you. You've got a little bit of time before I'm going to go to that chat box and start highlighting some of our areas of expertise in the room. Don't worry, this is relevant. One of the things that I'm going to teach you today is your expertise is important. It's vital to your legal risk management. You do not just hand over legal risk management to an attorney and say, gosh, well, I don't know anything about the law. You do, and you have it inside you to manage your risk in a way that is appropriate and consistent with your values. That's what we're going to talk about. So your expertise, although honestly, canning applesauce isn't quite what I mean, I do want to begin today's session with having you focus on your capacity and your expertise. So while you're doing that, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Farm Commons. Our mission is to empower farmers and ranchers to understand and solve their business law issues within an ecosystem of support. So a couple of tidbits to pull out of there. Business law issues. We are exclusively focused on business law. So things like that mostly just excludes family law, which is highly relevant, as unfortunately many of our farmers and ranchers, like most Americans, often go through a divorce. So we don't do those issues, but business law encompasses so much of the farmer and rancher's experience. It is today's subject, forming a business structure. It's contracts like leases, sales documents, it's employment law. How do you retain and hire? So there's all kinds of good stuff that we talk about. We empower folks to understand and solve their own issues, but of course we believe in that ecosystem of support. There's an important role for an attorney, for an accountant, and for other professionals, and we help farmers and ranchers understand how to best create that ecosystem of support. All right, how we do this? Exactly like this. We deliver farm law education, materials, and workshops. Perhaps more importantly, though, we train farmers to lead solutions in their own communities. We do that through a variety of ways, and I'll admit the pandemic has made that a bit harder for us because we used to do a lot of in-person work where we would train farmer leaders to be a part of our workshops. It's been more challenging, but you'll see a new program come out from us very soon to really give a boost to our farmer leadership. You can join Farm Commons as a member. By doing so, you can take our Discovering Resilience workshop, which is a thorough investigation of developing resilience on your farm or ranch. You can ask questions on our question and answer platform, access all of our guides and templates, 100+ resources at Farm Commons. So keep that in mind. All right, I'm going to take a look at the chat box. So you'll see me scoot this around so I can actually see it. What do we got for expertise in our audience? Okay. Ooh, someone is an expert in brainstorming and problem solving. I love that, and such a skill for any farmer or rancher to have, because what goes right, you know? Let's see. Amanda is an expert in taking on more responsibilities, projects, and hobbies and books than she can ever complete. So sounds good. Got some excitement for learning and doing. Another person is an expert in not getting in over their head and in being realistic. Now that is a fabulous expertise. that really leads to some quality of life. Keep them coming if you have a chance. Let us know your area of expertise. So I have a premise for you today, something that we are going to be focusing on. Legal education can reduce risk, build stronger communities, and even create joy. I was so thrilled to see that joy was also on our earlier slide as part of why we are gathering in this conference today. You might look at a legal education workshop and think, oh, now this is going to be boring. This is going to be technical. You know, sure, yeah, it's technical. I don't think it's too boring. But I truly believe that there is joy to be found in learning these things. And I'm here to show you how. We'll get to that at the end. So get excited. All right. So I know a little bit about your areas of expertise. Now there's a few more things I'd like to know. Using the chat box, let me know, are you a farm or ranch business owner or an advisor? Usually folks who attend conferences like these usually break down into two camps, either they actually do the production or they advise the production. Let me know which one you have. And if you have a chance, please let me know how long you've been in the role above. While you address those first two questions, we have one other area of expertise that has come in from the chat box. Shannon is an expert in being curious about things and often in searching out answers. Now that's an expertise that is going to go very well with what we're going to talk about today and in managing legal risk. Another thing I'd love to hear from you is whether or not you have formed a business entity before. Whether you're a producer or whether you're an advisor, maybe you have formed your own business entity like an LLC or a corporation. Maybe you've even helped someone else do it. Please let us know if you have that experience. All right. So in the chat box, we've got one individual who is a farm owner or ranch owner that's been doing so for 7 years and has formed an LLC. Perfect. I am thrilled to see that we have folks with experience and who have formed LLCs before. I know this session will still be valuable to you in helping you understand how to best use that entity to create legal resilience. Some more thoughts coming in. We have an owner operator, been around for 8 years and is considering an LLC. Another owner with an LLC. So great. Yep. Awesome. Another person who's been around for 5 years and has an LLC. This is really helpful to know. I'm glad to see that we have an audience that really has quite a bit of experience on the ground. That is actually the perfect place to be in when really thinking deeply about how to use a business entity to manage risk. Okay, awesome. So if we talk nationwide, about somewhere around half of our farmers and ranchers nationwide have not formed a business entity before as an LLC or corporation. About half of our farm and ranch businesses across the United States operate as a sole proprietorship or a partnership. Now, you're going to find out today that that does introduce some risk. So we're gonna talk about how we can resolve that risk and who's in the best position to do that. At Farm Commons, I always like to lead with action steps. You know, folks come to these sessions and they want to know what to do. They don't necessarily want to start with all the background. What do we do? Your mind is fresh, you're ready. So I'm going to tell you what it is we want you to do. Action step number 1, write a governance document. A governance document that creates solutions for you, your partners, and your farmer ranch's needs, circumstances, and expectations. Write that governance document. That's our action step number 1. And I'm going to spend a significant amount of time telling you today why this is, I suggest to you, the most important thing that you can do in the realm of business structures to reduce risk. But I have another action step, number 2, and this might be more of what you were thinking, I would say. Action step number 2 is to form an LLC or an S corporation if you are willing to deal with some additional paperwork and you want protection for your personal assets or tax savings when you make more in personal income from farming than the average farmer. It's kind of a lot going on in this slide. Don't worry, we will explain that. I'll explain exactly whom the LLC or the S corporation works with and for, how to form one. But before, we're going to go back to action step number 1. What about that governance document? Why is that our first action step? Well, let's get into it. All right, we got Jack and Jill. They want to go into business together. They're going to raise some beef. Jack is going to do the animal care. Jill's going to do the marketing. They've got access to land. It's Jill's family land. Things are going to be good, right? So think back on all of the nice, wonderful farm beginnings like this that you have heard about. What could possibly go wrong? You know, Jack and Jill have a great relationship. Everything is in place. They got the plans. They got the training. They got a market. But I'm actually asking you, what could go wrong? Use the comment box, or if you prefer to speak, you can use the raise hand function. We'll unmute you. Think about the groups of friends, the spouses, the significant others that go into business together. What are the woes that befall them? 1 year in, 3 years in, what goes wrong? I know you're thinking of some things. Well, while I'm waiting for you to put something in the chat box, I'm going to give you some ideas. Number 1, people disagree about how much effort others are putting in. Jack thinks Jill isn't working hard enough at marketing the beef, and that's why sales are down. Jill thinks Jack isn't doing a good enough job of raising the animals. That's why they're not putting on weight and why they don't have more product to sell. We got some chat box contributions. Yep, okay, someone else said it. Someone's worried that they're doing a lot more work than the other. What about crop failures? What about market crashes? Oh, the children, exactly. and someone is getting pulled away to consistently do more childcare duties, they're not able to provide other contributions. Someone else says they go separate ways, divorce, breakup, all that good stuff. So yes, these are the real things that disrupt farm businesses. What about, someone doesn't come through with a piece of equipment that they thought they had access to, or money that they thought they could bring to this relationship? What if Jill doesn't want to bring up certain issues with her family about the land that they're on? What if they disagree about investing in specific equipment? Equipment either to store their product, a new cooler, a new, product sales area. Disagreement about where or how to market the product. Maybe someone gets tired of raising beef or marketing the beef, and they'd like to go back to school, or something like that. God forbid, worst case scenario, one of them dies. All of these things can and do go wrong every day on farms and ranches across the country. And these are the issues that actually kill the future of agriculture for these farm families. These disruptions can be just completely fatal to that business. Everything else might have been going great, the animals are terrific, customers want the product, they're willing to pay, but these issues between the two are oftentimes what actually causes the bigger problem. What I want to propose to you is that it doesn't have to be this way. It can seem inevitable, but imagine a future where all farm and ranch businesses talked about some essential things. What if Jack and Jill talked in advance about what each partner needs to contribute to the business? Money, labor, and when? How are we compensated for our involvement? With what and when? Are we compensated with the promise of future profitability? Are we compensated with money, with time off? Who makes important decisions about big issues like buying property and going into debt? What happens if we want to leave the business? I definitely know farms that because there is no door to leave the business, resentment, feeling trapped, that those are the issues that actually destroy the relationship. Whereas if somebody could have left the farm, they might have stayed in the relationship. How do we handle disputes? How are we handling budgeting, financial procedures, governmental obligations? I don't know about you, but I think if we all talked about these things, we would be a lot better off. The surprising news to most people is that forming a business structure can help us sort out these issues. We don't just have to leave all of this to chance. We actually have a business opportunity together to talk about these. And that is our governance document. An LLC, a corporation, a partnership, whatever it is, there is a governance document that goes with that entity. It is where farmers and ranchers discuss and agree on these issues in advance, where they create pathways that work, that help them resolve issues before they get terribly large. So this stuff has so much power to resolve risk on the farm proactively. So the problem, of course, is that a lot of operations don't do this. Most, I would say to you, don't do this. It's hard to find exact numbers on how many farm and ranch operations have a governance document like this. These documents are not required to be filed with the state. Sometimes the state will require that corporate bylaws be filed. Sometimes a lender like FSA or a bank will ask for an operating agreement. But if I'm sitting across from an FSA lender and he or she says, I need an operating agreement for this, I'm probably just going to go home and print one off the internet and sign the bottom. It looks like a legal document. It looks like boilerplate. So even when folks have an operating agreement or bylaws, they did not actually go through the work to think about these issues. So what I want to suggest is that this is the most important step. this governance document is the single most important step that farmers and ranchers can make towards resiliency in business structures is this document. So, I'm not going to say this is easy. It's not. When FSA wants an operating agreement, the easiest thing is to print one off the internet or go down to the public library and make a copy. But it doesn't actually achieve our goal. It doesn't help us think through the issues that will actually be fatal to our farm in the long run. Some farmers work with attorneys to write their organizing document, and that is certainly a fine option. But we also know that that can be expensive. It's usually if you go to an attorney and say, I'd like to form an LLC, they'll say, well, that'll be $1,000, that'll be $1,500, and it'll come with an operating agreement. Every additional minute you spend, technically every additional 6 minutes you spend with an attorney to refine or improve or adjust that governance document is going to cost you. Most attorneys bill in 6-minute increments. So even when farmers work with attorneys to form these documents, they don't always walk away with a guide, with an actual plan for resiliency for their farm, because all that just costs more money. So to keep costs low, farmers don't ask for customization. They don't even really know what that document says a lot of times. So that's missing an opportunity. It's not where real resilience is going to be found. At this point, I want to take a pause and start using some specific names. I've been referring to the governance document generally, and I've referred casually to these specific names. The LLC, the governance document, is called an operating agreement. The corporation, it's called bylaws. And some of the details are often put in a shareholder agreement, but not always. A partnership just goes by a partnership agreement. Like we mentioned, generally speaking, the operating agreement is not required by law. I think Oregon is the only state that does. Corporations, bylaws can be required in many of the states, but again, the state doesn't care if you copied it from the internet. Partnership agreements, not generally required. So those are the exact titles that we are working with, but just know that all of these documents cover the same exact issues. How do we get into this relationship? How do we get out? What are we contributing? How are we compensated? How do we make big decisions? This is where real resilience is found. It is in the relationships that we have with the people whom we're working with. When we have that consistent understanding and familiarity and a plan, we can truly become resilient. But what happens when people don't do that? They don't have a plan. They didn't have to sign an operating agreement, so they never did. The bank never asked for one. They just don't have one. What happens then? Well, as we often say in the law, if you don't have a plan, the state has one for you. So yes, the state is there to step in with some default rules, some template rules. And these are enshrined in law as exactly that. They are there for folks who didn't figure out what they wanted for themselves. So, for example, state law says that by default, business decisions are made by a majority of the members of an LLC, for example, or the shareholders of a corporation. So let's go back to our Jack and Jill reference. Let's say that Jack and Jill added Betty to the farm at one point. Jack and Jill now do the production, Betty does the marketing and sales. Jack and Jill want a new piece of equipment. So they go and they finance, this $50,000 purchase. Then they go back and tell Betty, hey, farm expenses have really increased. So we're expecting you, Betty, to increase your sales volume over the next year. And we also want you to raise your prices because we got some bills to pay. Is that fine? The law says it's fine, sure. 2 out of the 3. It's a majority. So yeah, that's just what we're going to have to do. That's okay by the law, but is that okay for Betty? Is that really okay for Jack and Jill over the long term to be making decisions that are very significant in that way? Betty is going to be on the hook, when that bill needs to be paid her share in the business, I should say, is going to be on the hook. She can't go to the court and say, well, I had no part in this decision to buy this expensive piece of equipment. So again, if you don't have a plan, the state has one for you. You might not like it. And you're going to find out at a most inopportune time that you don't like that plan. So again, this is why resiliency is in those relationships. It's in thinking things through beforehand and defining for yourselves what is right for you. So these state defaults, a lot of them really do go on the basis of majority rule, which is determined by share of ownership. So if Betty comes into this relationship between, so it's Jack and Jill add Betty, and they add Betty because she has money. Betty comes with maybe some family money that she inherited. She's adding to their assets with some awesome equipment that they're going to use. Maybe she's got some pre-existing markets. All of a sudden, Betty's got a lot of ownership because she brought a lot of resources to this. Let's say that Betty actually owns 75% of this ranch now. If decisions are made on the basis of majority rule by share of ownership, Betty's the boss. Is that what Jack and Jill want? Is that okay for deciding how they go into debt, the sale of assets, even the sale of land that this entity owns? We got some serious questions. So I think I've probably made my point, probably understanding why we have a lot of detailed issues that we need to figure out if we're going to build real resiliency in our farm. But am I leaving some of you out? What about those of you that don't have a partner? Does any of this apply to you? Does the governance document apply to you? Yes, it does. However, the reasons are different. The governance document is essential for those who work with others because these issues of decision-making and responsibility are so critical. It's so much easier when you work by yourself. All you have to do is ask yourself if you're on the same page as yourself and make the decisions yourself. Pretty glorious. Now, in this case, you still want this governance document because it creates legal legitimacy. I will explain this in a little bit more depth in a moment, but the LLC and the corporation, the legal basis of them is that you are separate than your business. So the state is allowing you, by giving you the opportunity to form an LLC or a corporation, is allowing you to separate yourself from your business. It feels a little weird and contorted, but I am myself and I am also the only owner of this business. So where really is that line? People who own a business by themselves can end up blurring that line. One of the key ways that we reinforce the legitimacy of an LLC or a corporation is to draft the operating agreement and write the bylaws. So even if you form a ranch only by yourself, a governance document is still an essential move to develop your legitimacy. The good news is it's a lot easier to write because you don't have to have any of those hard conversations. You don't have to discuss your potential death. You just write one. And we've got a sample. I'll tell you about some resources that we have for you to help everyone be able to write one of these documents. So again, true resilience is not found in following state default laws. It's found by going through the difficult, powerful conversations about what we need. All right. So what I'm going to do is I am going to put up a list of, oh wait, I already did. The list is right in front of you. A list of these important issues for farm and ranch partners to think about. Now, I'm going to copy this list and I'm going to put it in the chat box for you. Okay, and we're going to have a little discussion, not in breakout rooms, actually, because that's just a little more complicated. This is kind of why I show my live presentation, so I can edit it as I go. I put a copy of these questions right in the chat box. What I want to hear from you is, which issue do you think is the most important? And I want to know that from two perspectives. Is there something that you think is most important for other farmers? Is there an issue that you see in your community as the most problematic or the most important to discuss? Or take it from a different angle. Is there something in your life that actually is the most important for you to discuss? Because sometimes what's really important in your community isn't necessarily the same thing as what's important for you, vice versa. So I want you to think about that, and I would love your opinions on which is the most important. You might be thinking, oh, they're all important. They are, but we do have to start somewhere. And thinking about priority can actually help us find a foothold. When we look at these questions, all of them at once, we might think, oh my God, that's like months worth of very difficult conversations with my spouse. And honestly, we're running a farm and raising children at the same time. If you can identify what's most important, you can have one question to start with. And when you talk about that, you can experience one win. You can experience the success of talking about that. And then you're in a better position to just keep building on that, keep going. You don't have to get this all done at once. You have time. So it can help us think about how to get a foothold in these essential issues. I'm going to wait for a little chat box contribution. And while we're doing that, I'm going to reflect. If you farm with a partner, doing this is the most challenging action point that I will tell you about today. Forming an LLC, oh, it's easy. Why do you know? You've already done it. It didn't take 3 months. This is the hard stuff. This is also the really important stuff. So if you can get a foothold here, you are winning. You're doing great. Now, we've got resources to help you move forward. See, we have a full list of issues to address, and we have sample organizing documents in our Farmer's Guide to Business Structures. I thought I put this right near at hand, just a second. If you can see your camera, it looks like this. It is available as an actual book. You can order it from SARE, Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. It's $25, but it's in color. You're not making money off it. Your other option is you can access it as an e-file at Farm Commons, and that is available to our members. So we run an annual membership program to help distribute our resources. So we've got some contributions in the chat box about which issues are most important. One person says compensation, especially when there's a big disparity in experience levels or what assets people are bringing to the business. I agree. That is just a top issue that we run into because compensation is kind of what helps us keep the lights on and helps us see a path forward to the future. Another person says handling disagreements. I can see that one as a priority issue too, because if you can handle disagreements, you can kind of roll with whatever comes up. Amanda suggests partner responsibilities. What does each partner contribute and when? And these, you can tell, these kind of roll together. A little bit of that is about how do we avoid these disagreements? How do we figure out how we're compensated? How partners exit the business, Amanda suggests, as an important one. And Shannon also built on this by saying that contributions from each person to the business can be tricky to measure and track. How do we make sure everyone understands and values all the other jobs that need to be done? Oh, exactly. We have worked with farmers that are concerned that their partner spends a lot of time on things that aren't important or takes twice as long to do a job. And so they're concerned, especially when they're not husband and wife. The scenario I'm specifically thinking of, it was two friends. They had a really good understanding that that person's going to spend twice as long producing the same result because that's the way they work. So getting compensated for hours spent just seemed really unfair. And the one person wanted to make sure that compensation was based on amount accomplished. Did that work for the other partner? Only a conversation will reveal. So yes, it can seem easy to talk about these things, and once we get into it, we discover we have bigger issues at play. Now, to some folks, discovering we have bigger issues at play can be really devastating. Like, oh man, we can't get past these problems. It can help to consider that a win. If we have problems we are not going to get past, let's find out now. Okay, quick view on what you'll find in the Farmer's Guide to Business Structures. It's detailed information. This little part in blue is a clause that we're recommending in an operating agreement. Everything is annotated. We tell you exactly what that means as well. So pretty cool documents. And they definitely give you a big leg up in understanding how to write a governance document. If you are one of those folks that already has an LLC and you already have an operating agreement, and now you're thinking, I didn't spend this much time on it. I don't actually know what that says. No problem. You can amend it. It's quite easy. There should be a section at the end that tells you how it's amended. Usually you just agree to amend it. So you're in the same spot as everyone else. Just think through what you really do want and have those conversations and rewrite it. Our resources will help you do that. So that's the end of the most challenging stuff. And now we're transitioning to the part of the presentation where we talk about choosing the business structure. All that effort on writing the governance document. Now we get to which one. I have a handout for you. It's a file that I am going to attach in the chat box before the end of our time today. Oh, I might need host status, but we'll get to that. I'll get you this handout, even if I just email it to Quivira to distribute. It has a flow chart in there that will walk you through our business structures. So we're going to cover a number of different options, but honestly, it breaks down into three. You have three primary options. These are what the vast majority of farm and ranch businesses across the United States are going to pick from. It's going to be one of these three, unless we have some truly exceptional circumstances. We have a sole proprietorship / partnership, our limited liability company, or LLC, and our corporation. The key difference, the key thing you need to know about this is which of these protect your personal assets from your business liabilities. Two of these do that, and that is the LLC and the corporation. The sole proprietorship and partnership do not. Okay, so this is really, really important. And a major reason, a major driver of people forming LLCs and corporations is to get this advantage. It protects personal assets from business liabilities. When I say personal assets, please know that we are distinguishing that from farm assets, because your farm becomes the business. Remember, I said this before, the fundamental reason you can do this, you can protect your personal assets from your business liabilities, is that you're separating yourself from your business. You are no longer your business in an LLC or a corporation. So you got to divide some piles. You've got the business assets and liabilities over here, and you've got the personal assets and liabilities over here. Now, honestly, for most farmers, the business asset pile is the big one. That's the one with the most expensive stuff in it. That's where our tractors, our machinery, our assets, our facilities go here. What goes in the personal pile? Your house, your personal vehicle. If you have a hunting cabin or, retirement account, those are personal. But a lot of the big stuff goes in the business pile. So your personal assets are protected from your business liabilities. And that sounds great, and it is. But I got a couple more cautions for you before we get too excited. Protection for your personal assets is not guaranteed simply because you formed an LLC or a corporation. You got to keep up this division. You have to make it real. You have to separate your personal and business finances. We run into farmers and ranchers across the United States that worked with someone to form an LLC, and they filed the paperwork with the state and got the LLC, but then they never did anything different with their books. They kept using the same checkbook for buying Halloween, buying candy Halloween. Oh man, buying, you know what's coming up, Halloween. We buy candy. They bought the candy. That's totally personal. As they bought, the animal feed from. Not supposed to do that. Supposed to keep those separate. That's because at all times we need to know what the business assets are. Business assets are always available to satisfy business liabilities. So all that money that's sitting in the bank account that's ready to pay the feed bill is a business asset and is going to be available for business liabilities. So we can't have that sitting in our personal bank account. If we do, it's like, well, why isn't the money for the Halloween candy also available? You're mixing them. You're mixing those piles. So we're just going to take the whole thing. You got to keep up your annual obligations with the state and federal government as well. They can dissolve you. It's usually called an administrative dissolution if you don't keep up those obligations. It's usually really easy. You just have to keep telling the state that you're there, raising your hand and submitting your annual fee. And you also need to watch out for personal guarantees. Sure, yes, your personal assets are protected from your business liabilities, unless you pledged your personal assets for a business liability. This can happen in various ways. If you're financing a farm operation with a mortgage on your home and you personally guarantee that, then potentially your home is available if you don't pay the bills, if you're not able to make those payments. So for these reasons, not every farmer wants an LLC or corporation. They don't, separating these assets is not their thing. They're not good with the paperwork, and everything is going to have a personal guarantee anyways. But I will say most farmers and ranchers do find this attractive and do choose to form one. I hinted at this point, but I'm going to make it a little bit more stridently. Which of these business structures protects your business assets from business liabilities? None of them. None of them. Your business assets are always available to satisfy your business liabilities. Somebody eats your meat and gets sick. Somebody gets kicked by a horse. Somebody falls off a tractor. That's a business liability, and business assets are available. The only way to protect your business assets from business liabilities is insurance. So our key learning point is that an LLC or corporation is not a substitute for insurance. Some farmers make this mistake because you look at the fees to form an LLC and it's like $100. You look at the cost of insurance and it's like $600. They are not the same. They do not provide the same thing. Both. Think both. One protects your personal assets, the other protects your business assets. Okay, I see we got a question, and I'm going to take a look at that. So what's the best business structure if you would like to offer or transfer shares to others, like family members or employees? This person is thinking maybe they would like to be able to offer shares to key employees that would accrue over time, maybe with a period of time for employees to become vested, like 5 years. And then if they quit, of course, it doesn't vest. Great idea. That's a great idea. Any of these business structures can do that for you. Well, any of the ones that have limited liability. You don't want to, you could do that with a partnership, but that's not really a good idea. You want that personal liability, personal asset protection, especially when you're joining other people into ownership. So an LLC can do that. A corporation can do that. There are ways to structure, you could even start transferring this into a worker-owned cooperative. So there are definitely options. The key is writing the operating agreement or bylaws to spell out exactly how this happens. And that's where the good stuff is. 5 years is a great idea. Is that exactly what you want? Exactly what share of ownership do they earn at that 5 years and every year thereafter? How are you managing decision making? Are you retaining majority decision making? So you might have these employees that individually have a 10% ownership, collectively have a 30% ownership, but actually don't make any decisions because they don't have enough authority. That's not right or wrong. Is that what you want? So it's all just thinking through exactly how you want to do it. An LLC or a corporation, they can do exactly what you want. I'm going to get into that a little bit more now. So most farmers and ranchers think the benefits of a limited liability company or limited liability entity, that being an LLC or a corporation, are worth it. So then we get to the question of which one do we choose? Which one is better, the LLC or the corporation? People say that LLCs are more flexible. This is technically true. An LLC can have more than 100 members. In an LLC, members can be other LLCs or corporations. Operating agreements and officers are not required in all but one state. So folks look at that and they're like, well, that sounds good. I can have lots of members. I can have other LLCs. I don't have to have an operating agreement. And then they might think, well, did I want any of that? I was thinking more like 5 members, 2 probably. We're all just normal people. We weren't going to form an LLC to, sometimes folks do that. It's a little complicated. We can talk about it later. But most of the time, people don't care about that. And I already told you why you want an operating agreement anyways. So it's not really helpful to have this flexibility for a lot of farmers. Instead, what happens in real life is people tend to make this decision on the basis of other factors, like how much is it going to cost me? How much will it cost to get my taxes prepared? I've got some examples for you. Now, in the state of Montana, it costs the same. To form an LLC is going to cost you $70, same with the corporation. And every year you're going to give the state of Montana $20 to continue it. Pretty cheap. California does have a little bit of a difference. And this is, a trend. There's usually some amount of difference. It is $75 to form an LLC, cost you more, cost you $30 more to form a corporation. And the annual fee is higher for the corporation in California. So, if you're in California, you might be like, I'm going to save a few bucks and do the LLC. But in California, you also want to look at the annual franchise tax. So that is how these entities are taxed. So here you got to talk with your accountant or tax preparer to figure out if you're going to have an advantage based on the way the two are taxed. I will say that is not, it's more common on the West Coast, but a lot of the other states do not have any sort of annual franchise tax for these entities. Oregon does. The formation fees and annual fees are the same across LLC or corporation, but the LLC has no annual franchise tax. C corporations do. Maybe in Oregon, it's like, LLC looks good. The bottom line is talk with your tax preparer or accountant. Get their thoughts on which of these is the more efficient choice. Both of them offer the same level of protection for your personal assets from business liabilities. So we really can go to these very practical questions about what's going to work for us. If you're saying, well, I don't work with a tax preparer or accountant, that's fine. You can learn these things yourself, but you are learning the things that a tax preparer or an accountant learns, and that might not be your cup of tea. Think about whether that's really a path that you want to go down. You might invest 20, 30, 40 hours into figuring this out, whereas you could ask a tax preparer, an accountant who looks at your books for 1 hour and gets you an answer. So think about where your time is well spent. In 5 minutes, I'm going to ask you for another contribution in our chat box. Do you have a great accountant or tax preparer? If you do, how did you find them? If you do and you pay for that service, is it worth it to you? And do you have any tips for other folks who are on today's session for working with accounting and tax prep professionals? Now, I know a lot of you have been in business for 5 years or more. So if you have thoughts on this, it's really helpful, both to the other people in the room today and anyone who watches the recording. So I will re-ask this question in 5 minutes and giving you a little bit of a preview so you can think about it. To be clear, the choice between the LLC or the corporation, our two limited liability entities, is rarely the difference between success and failure. The difference between success and failure rests so much more on those issues of decision making and proactive planning between our partners. This one could be an easy decision. We haven't yet got to the issue of taxes. I've alluded to the franchise tax, and you want to look and see if that exists in your state and what it might mean for you. But what about the IRS? The IRS is for everybody, no matter what state you are in. Is there any tax advantage to one or the other? The quick answer is no, there's not an advantage for one or the other between LLC and corporation. The advantage is the LLC or corporation versus the sole proprietorship or partnership. So if you form an LLC or corporation, not only do you get protection for your personal assets from business liabilities, you also get the opportunity to be taxed under Subchapter S of the Federal Tax Code. This is often called filing as an S corporation. But that's a little bit misleading because you can file as an S corporation even if you're an LLC. So this is an advantage that is available to anyone who has an LLC or a corporation. That's why I prefer the phrase filing under Subchapter S. This can be advantageous if you are making more in personal income from farming than the average farmer in a similar position. Okay, what does that mean? I have a graph. Let's look at it. All right, I've got 2 lines in front of you. I got this line that says 30 bucks. I got this line that says 40 bucks. Let's say that the average farmer makes 30 bucks annually. Farmer May is doing amazing. This year, Farmer May made $40. Now, in our first column, it's in entirely blue, she is taxed as a partnership or a sole proprietor. In that event, the entirety of her $40 is taxed at the ordinary income tax rate. But now let's say the farmer May has an LLC or a corporation and elects to be taxed under Subchapter S. Awesome. In this situation, she takes that overage, the $10 of overage, $10 between 30, which is the average, and 40, what she made. And she gets that taxed at the current dividends rate. The 30 bucks is taxed at the ordinary income rate. Generally speaking, but not as a rule, generally speaking, the dividends tax rate is lower than the ordinary income tax rate. But it depends. The dividends tax rate goes up and down as different administrations change it. And the ordinary income tax rate is going to depend on how much money you make and how much money your spouse makes if you file jointly. So there's no single answer. What you need to do is be aware that when you're making income on par with your peers, explore filing under Subchapter S. Speak with your tax preparer or accountant for those timelines. You have to prepare to file under Subchapter S. You have to make an election, it's called. And you can't make that election every year based on where your income is at. You gotta pick it and stick with it for a period of time. So it's best to do this in consultation with your tax preparer or accountant. And that brings us back to my other question. Do you have a great tax accountant, tax preparer or accountant? How did you find them? Do you have any tips for working with those folks? Definitely put that in the chat box. And if I see something pop up, I will raise it to our attention. All right. Before we move more fully to your questions, because I've definitely saved some time in today's presentation for your questions, I have what I call bonus content, going above and beyond those basics, those basic action points that I really wanted you to understand. Let's talk about anti-corporate farming laws. Now, there do exist across the United States anti-corporate farming laws that prohibit LLCs and corporations from leasing or owning farmland. Now, assuming our audience was mostly left of the Mississippi River, I've just called out South Dakota, Oklahoma, and Kansas as having these rules. So if you're in one of those states, or if you come right at the Mississippi River, be aware that these are a Midwest phenomenon, and they can impact your ability to form an LLC or corporation when you are engaged in farming. However, of course, there are exceptions large enough to drive a tractor through. Those exceptions are largely for where these farms are owned by family members. Family members often includes nieces, nephews, grandparents, extended cousins even. So as long as you're family, you're usually good to form an LLC or corporation in any of these states that has one of these laws. Where things actually get dicey is when we have a group of, say, 5 or more folks who want to form an LLC for the purposes of farming and are not related. This comes up especially in many of our younger farming communities that are looking at innovative ways of building equitable land access. Folks recognizing that without family land, it can be really hard to get into farming, and are looking at pooling their resources with other like-minded folks and going in together to buy farmland that they can share and work cooperatively together with. Those are actually the situations that are the most vulnerable to anti-corporate farming laws. It's not what the laws were intended to prevent. They're not there to try to stop well-meaning, groups of 8 young people who can't afford to buy their own land. It's not intended to stop that, but it can end up stopping that. So those are the folks that we really need to know that these laws exist, and they need to work carefully to get around them. Usually there's an exception that they might be able to fit if they're aware and adjust things so that they work. All right, my next bonus item. When do I need a separate business structure? This question often comes up in the context of agritourism. I've got a beautiful farm operation. People love my pumpkin patch, but I'm not making money on wholesale pumpkins. I would like to do a U-Pick. I want to do a farm festival. The ranch is beautiful, but the cows aren't making money. What we're going to do is we're going to have a farm stay. The farm stay is going to bring in more revenue. Once we do that agritourism, we start thinking, should we have a separate business structure? This also comes up with value added. Maybe we want to start, making beef stew. We're going to build a processing kitchen. We're going to dry our herbs and make teas. Whether or not we need a separate business structure rests on a few important questions. Is there significantly increased risk, business risk, in one area or the other? Oftentimes, agritourism, yes, experiences significantly increased risks. The production farm may have no visitors. The agritourism farm may have 5-year-olds, 50 of them running around every Saturday, bonking into things and falling into holes. A lot more risk. Do we have a significantly higher asset value in one area or the other? This is a little bit more relevant in terms of value added. We have an orchard and our costs are, our asset values are like the tractor, the pack shed, those things. If we start making cider, we're investing in, a commercial enterprise that has, a food license. We're complying with HACCP. We have a lot more assets that are going to go into the cider as compared to just plain apple production a lot of times. So higher asset value. And do we have a legitimate division of operations? Are these things actually distinct? The answer is yes. For agritourism, value added, yes. Those are truly distinct areas, and we're probably going to keep separate books anyways, so that we can better understand the nature of the apple production versus the cidery. So we're going to make the different business decisions based on that. Things get a little tricky on this last point when folks are trying to separate. What's a good example? Like vegetable production from the vegetable CSA. It's not that different. Like if you grow them, you have to market them in some way. So that's marketing the product in some way is part of production. So the fact that you're doing it as a CSA, well, that's a style choice, but it's not necessarily a great division of operations. Where you have these three things, increased risk, higher asset value, and a legitimate division of operations, it can be a great choice to separate the business structures. If you do that, you need a whole new set of books. You need a whole new tax return. So there's a cost to doing it. The benefit is that you are limiting the business liabilities to those specific assets. If somebody gets sick from drinking the cider, only the assets used to produce the cider are available. So, the apple press, that stuff, not the actual farm. So the benefit is cordoning off certain assets as liable for only specific risks that befell from that enterprise. But there's a cost to it. More tax returns, more paper, more books. We have a whole chapter in the Farmer's Guide to Business Structures to help tease that out a little bit more. Oh, and I forgot to specifically mention, we do have flow charts on all of the state's anti-corporate farming laws as well, if those felt relevant to you. One last bonus item here, trusts versus business entities. We get this a lot. We run through the end of the business entities presentation and somebody says, what about trusts? Business entities and trusts are two completely different things. They have two completely different purposes. Business entities exist for the purpose of separating personal assets from business liabilities. That is why they were invented and their point. Trusts have a completely different objective. They exist to control or administer property ownership, property use, to control and administer assets. A business entity is not there to control or distribute assets. It retains its assets. It's operating with assets. When it comes time to transfer them, at some point we may choose to use a trust, but we don't have to. Usually a trust is just about passing things to the next generation as assets, not as a business. Oftentimes when we want to actually transfer the entire business, we don't use a trust, although you can. We can use the business entity itself to transfer the ownership. So think about trusts as like, well, I want Billy and Jill to get, the farmhouse, and I want Betty and Joe to get the tractor. That's a trust. So they have totally different goals. All right. So I do want to leave you with a little bit of that joy. I said there'd be joy. So it might be hard to find right now. Chances are those of you who farm or ranch with other people are thinking, great, in order to do this, I got some awkward, hard, or frustrating conversations ahead of me. Great, now I have to talk about death and disability and divorce. Not fun, but it can be worth it. Think about some times in your life where you've dreaded a hard conversation and you did the ostrich thing. You put your head in the sand, tried to forget about it, tried to pretend it wasn't really there. And now think of the feeling that you had after you dealt with that issue. You feel freedom and joy. You feel like a baby in a swing. You can laugh again because you've been released from that dread, from that thing that is hanging over your head. Even if the conversation went badly, you can feel some joy at the end because you've been released from that prison of your fear. That's really where the joy lies. And when we have hard conversations, when we take that step and open up that discussion, so much more joy is available to us than when we were sticking our head in the sand. So you can do it. You can do it. And by doing it, you're being a part of something big. You're a part of something where you say, look, I do know what I want. I do know what's right for my farm or ranch. And I am going to shape my relationships in a way that preserves my values and builds what I want. That's powerful. It's more powerful than going to an attorney and accepting whatever they hand you out of the drawer. It's more powerful than going to the internet or the library. You are taking control of what is important to you. And that is big. So think about these action steps that I offered you. Write the governance document. Form the LLC or corporation. And think about what is right for you in your situation right now. I said I had a document that I would attach or send out to you afterwards. It's got a little planner thing in it that you can use to actually indicate, to actually write down which of these action steps are right for you. What kind of a timeline do you want to do it on? And what resources do you want to use to help you go forward? So if anyone wants to share their action steps, we would love to do that now. You can always write it in the chat box. But most importantly, thank you for listening to this. Thank you for taking an interest in this side of your farm business and in resilience. I depend on you doing that. I mean, my entire career and everything that I do is built on a community of farmers and ranchers like yourself that make a difference. So when you think about resilience and you think about protecting yourself, you are serving all of us in helping us be able to participate in the world that you are building. So thank you. And I know it's this stuff can be really challenging, but there is guidance available. And now we're at our question portion. We got 15 minutes left. So, so what's on your mind?
Rachel, I just made you co-host because you mentioned earlier that there was a guide that you were going to add to the chat. So I think you should be able to do that now.
Sounds good. I'm going to futz away on this right now.
One thing I might encourage, if folks have questions, I know Rachel won't have time to answer questions about totally other topics right now, but what she might be able to tell you is if there's sort of other things you have questions about, if that's like an area that Farm Commons covers as well, because like I said at the beginning, Farm Commons has so many really great resources. And Rachel, if you want, we can also send a link out to the PDF that you just put in here when we send the like end of day email that recaps everything that happened today. It has links to recordings.
Perfect. Sounds good. Yeah, it's kind of a large file. If anyone has trouble accessing it, that might be a better way to go.
Okay.
All right.
See some thank yous in the chat. Great. If there's no general questions, maybe I'll stop the recording now, and if people want to hop off early, they're welcome to. And if folks want to stay on and have any other follow-up questions that you're too shy to ask on the recording, can hang out and do that for a few minutes.
Shannon has an interesting question. She says,
Great. Yeah.
Thanks for mentioning groups of farmers wanting to solve the land access problem together. Does Farm Commons have material to help inform that process? Gosh, that's a great question. And the short answer is no, but the long answer is yes. The problem is that we only have exactly what we have. There isn't like, there's just an LLC and a corporation. There's just anti-corporate farming laws that make it harder in Midwestern states to do that. And we often just have to talk on a very individual basis about exactly what innovative persons and groups of people are doing and whether or not that will fit within the exact confines of the anti-corporate farming laws. So we actually have struggled to figure out what more we could produce. It's kind of like putting a different title on it, which I think actually might be valuable, and maybe we will do that. It's just kind of put a new title on it and sort of reframe what we have to inform these processes. But we've also struggled with it being a little bit disappointing, where folks will ask us, well, what's the right business structure for this? You know, I've got 4 people, 3 of them are going to do production. One of them just wants to run a childcare service out of the house, and we've got 2 people over here who want to come in and make sauerkraut out of the cabbage. What's the right business structure? It's like any of them. The LLC, the corporation, like nothing changes. That's a great plan. It's a great idea. You could totally do it. The work is just in figuring out what you really want. How do you get in? How do you get out? How are you compensated? And no one can answer those questions except the people involved. So we've struggled at Farm Commons because we want to help, but there is no shortcut to strong conversations, powerful conversations, and people, especially groups of people, going through the hard work of thinking critically about what they want and what they think will work for them. So we have our operating agreements, they're annotated. We have one that's written in the model of 3 sisters who are working together to try to create enough complexity to show what's possible. But at the end of the day, no one can tell a group of innovative farmers what's right. And it really depends on their personal goals and circumstances. So, we probably should produce some sort of guide that like lays it out like that. But all that stuff will kind of point back to the stuff we already have.
Any other last questions? Okay, well, I'm going to stop the recording here, but you don't have to hop off now if you want to linger for a little bit.
If you want to know more about leases, stop back in tomorrow and we'll get into that topic. You'll notice a lot of the same trends. You can have what you want. You just have to agree to it and write it down.
Great. Yeah, hopefully we'll see some of you on tomorrow's call.
Perfect.
Well, thanks so much, Rachel.